our first night in Paris, my 8-year-old daughter Katie and I had dinner with my cousin Janine and her husband Bruno, a native Frenchman, in their flat overlooking the manicured hedges of the Tuileries Gardens. After lighting the candles on her rustic wood dining table, Janine poured burgundy into bulbous glasses and then set down broiled chicken and sliced potatoes and began recommending places to visit in Paris. Bruno caught a glimpse of the street map that I unfolded and quickly started shaking his head with a blend of pity and disdain. My Paris map was meticulously marked with colored stickers indicating where Katie and I would visit each day. There was an orange sticker on the Eiffel Tower, which we planned to climb on Monday, a yellow dot over Notre Dame for Tuesday's visit, a pink sticker on the Louvre for Wednesday, and so on. Bruno rolled his eyes dramatically, as though he didn't even know where to begin. He inhaled his cigarette deeply. Jennifer, in order to know Paris, you must simply relax, have a glass of wine, and enjoy life. Enjoy life and relax? What was this guy talking about? I was an American mother of a third grader. I was part of a carpool, and I shuttled my daughter to soccer practice and art lessons and whatever else I slated onto her painstakingly overscheduled calendar. I took such great pleasure in checking boxes on my to-do list that on days when I ran an unplanned errand, I would go back to the list, add the item, just so that I could experience the immense satisfaction of checking it off. This relax and enjoy life stuff was wildly exotic. A few days into our visit, Katie and I stumbled on the Shakespeare and Company booksellers on the left bank across the Seine River from Notre Dame. The shop was a converted 17th century monastery that now housed one of Europe's largest collections of English language books. Shakespeare and Company was everything a bookstore should be, with new and used books lining every wall, cluttered and haphazardly organized. A mirrored wall included photos of authors who had visited, including Henry James, Anais Nin, and Allen Ginsberg. There was a resident cat who snuggled in the corner under a corkboard listing literary events and local readings. It was a cozy heaven, the perfect setting to read a novel and enjoy a pot of tea during a thunderstorm. I found it utterly charming and completely disorienting. Painted on the walls were the words, "Be not inhospitable to strangers, lest they be angels in disguise." And discreetly placed in the stacks was evidence that Shakespeare and Company lived this philosophy. Small cots, bedrolls, pillows, and backpacks were tucked between the bookshelves. Katie's little brown pigtails flew through the air as her head turned quickly, taking it in. She approached a woman who worked there, stood on the toes of her white Buster Brown sandals, and asked, do people sleep here?" The clerk was about 20 years old, with black Betty Page bangs and 2 full sleeves of colorful tattoos. I imagined her name was something cool like Pandora or Clementine. The woman explained that travelers were welcome to stay overnight at the bookstore in exchange for a few hours of work during the day. These guests were endearingly called tumbleweeds and could call the bookstore their home for anywhere from 1 night to several months. Tapping on her computer, the woman continued, "Or, if you're a writer, you can stay as our guest in the writer studio." "My mom's a writer," Katie said, her eyes wide, begging for the sleepover. The store clerk raised her brows at me, a shorthand for an invitation. This was not part of the plan. There was no sticker for this. And yet, here was the perfect opportunity to ditch my routine and experience life with Katie in a new setting, not just as a mother and a daughter, but as travel buddies and roommates. And also, Sharing a room in a Paris bookstore that doubled as a literary youth hostel sounded like the kind of thing that people who relax and enjoy life would do. So I was in. Check-in is at midnight, the clerk told us before returning to her work. At the appointed hour, Katie and I sat on a bench in the bookstore next to a dozen 20-somethings with facial piercings and backpacks of bands sporting logos of bands with names like Diabetic Coma and Blistered Anus. Ouch, Katie commented to the owner. One of the boys with a backpack said, "They're crap since they lost their bass player." Katie shrugged. "That can happen." She had absolutely no idea how the loss of a musician could affect a band, but she shook her head as though she'd been through it a couple times herself. And I was busy thinking what a shame it was that the young bass player of Blistered Anus had died. Katie asked if he had left to join a new band with different friends. Another mother and her young daughter knocked on the door, apologizing for being late for check-in. Looking like characters from Les Mis, this mother and her barefoot Cosette explained that they lost track of time dancing in the street during the Bastille Day festivities. The nighttime clerk told her it was fine, and then he explained to us that the rules were to be respectful of one another and to be careful when we smoked. Like, they were okay with people sparking up in a place packed to capacity with books. I decided to relax and enjoy life while simultaneously locating the emergency exits. As Katie and I were shown to the writer's studio, we were hit by a thick fog of heat and peeling wallpaper snaking down the sides of the room. I had several thoughts about spending the night in the same room where Henry James once slept. One, it looked like they had not changed the sheets since he slept there. I mean, was that a coffee stain on my pillow, or was that something I did not want to know about? The brown wool blanket on my bed made me itch just from looking at it. And what was in those blue overstuffed garbage bags? And I could kind of see men's shoes, a frayed electrical wire, and an empty bottle of some sort of alcohol. This wasn't a writer's studio as much as it was a crime scene. Katie's bed was not a bed at all. It was a yoga mat on top of a detached door that was resting on two file cabinets of unequal height. And Andy Griffith looked awfully young on that box of Ritz crackers in the corner. When I turned on the sink spigot, a tornado of gnats flew out. Thankfully, they made a quick exit through the window, but that only opened halfway, which was a problem because it was broiling hot in this room, and it was the second floor, directly above a row of trash receptacles. At the same moment, Katie and I shared our thoughts about our room. I said, "Ugh, I smell hot garbage." Katie looked out the crack of our window and gasped, "We have a perfect view of Notre Dame." Katie fell asleep immediately, but I was awake for hours until I could smell that the Tumbleweeds had stopped smoking weed and that the cats outside had finished digging through the trash. Meanwhile, Shakespeare's resident cat, which had been so mellow during the day, seemed to have developed a methamphetamine habit. I wondered, why was he scampering across the floor back and forth like crazy? And then I realized he is chasing something. Or some things. In the morning when I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was 3 fresh little mouse turds beside me on my bed. I woke up Katie and I told her it was time to run back to our hotel, burn our clothes, and take the hottest possible shower that we could stand. Later that day, Katie and I took our bus ride to Giverny to visit Monet's gardens. My daughter stared out the window, watching the city landscape scroll by and transform into fields of lavender. I can't believe we got to sleep over at a bookstore. Wasn't that the best? Katie carried this attitude with her throughout our visit and her childhood, and then she took it with her to college. A few weeks into my stint as an empty nester, I opened the door to her bedroom, which still had her name spelled in juvenile clown letters. There was the Mexican mirror above her dresser that I had bought at a flea market and then carried home in a basket under her stroller, and the glazed tile birth announcement that my Aunt Bernice made at one of those do-it-yourself ceramics places. Her bed was neatly made. There were no clothes strewn across the floor and piled onto her chair, no backpack tossed carelessly next to her desk, or textbooks set across the floor like stones on a stream. It was so neat that even the carpet still had vacuum track marks from the week earlier. I sat down on the floor in the middle of her bedroom, and I looked around at a lifetime of Katie's memories, of my memories. I looked on her bookshelf and I saw her favorite childhood story, The Birthday Present, a sweet tale of friendship between a rabbit and a hedgehog. Next to it were her travel journals, filled with notes from our summers abroad. I slid the first volume from the shelf, the one with the Eiffel Tower on the front, and I opened to the very first page. I laughed at her recollection of our first day in France. "Mommy had jet lag and threw up," she wrote. "The French are very helpful. They helped us with our luggage upstairs and on the metro." She was right. The French were helpful, but what she hadn't mentioned was that the reason we needed assistance was that I got our suitcase stuck in the metro turnstile, and it took 3 burly Frenchmen to dislodge it. And I also vividly remember being jet-lagged and vomiting in our toilet of our hotel room immediately upon arrival. I rested my head against the floor afterward, feeling the cool tiles against my face and Katie's hand gently stroking my head. She used her fingers to comb my hair as I had done for her over the years when she was sick. "You're gonna feel better really soon, Mommy." And then, based on all evidence to the contrary, she said, "I have a really good feeling about this trip." She was right. It was a great trip in spite of more than a few missteps along the way. As much as I loved our travels together, the real joy came from sharing a room and sharing a life with a child who could teach me that living was best enjoyed when the smell of garbage is ignored and I focus on what's beautiful. And when I fight my natural tendencies to make lists and fret about checking boxes, and instead do as Bruno advised and just relax and enjoy life. Thank you.